Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Brooks Barrett, the UCC's Environmental Justice Minister. On behalf of the UCC's Council for Climate Justice, welcome to each of you. Climate Action Assemblies are a way in which we live out the calls to action that our members have given voice to through General Synod resolutions. The plan for our meeting today is this. We will have an opening prayer and song from the Reverend Kenneth Makuakāne. Then Rob Grable will then introduce our special guest speaker, Judith Enck, who will share with us about ways to address plastic pollution. After Judith's presentation and the Q&A that will follow, we'll do some community building conversations and breakout rooms. We'll then close out our meeting with updates on our Electrification Checklist Initiative and the Vote for Climate Hope campaign. So we've got a full, exciting agenda for today. Kenneth, I will now turn it over to you.
Okay. Eho mana kako, let us pray. E kia kua mana lo kia kua o na mea pau. Eho ona mai oi ia mākou I kia aha kuka e ho malu I ka honua. Na mea ola, na la au, a me na kanaka. O Lord, bless this Climate Action Assembly gathering that we may care for our wonderful earth, for the living beings, for the plants, and for the people. Help us to stand firm in caring, for protecting, and bringing peace. Let us look at the land with wisdom, with humility, so that we can prepare to protect the wealth of the earth for future generations. Show us what is needed for people and all living things. Give us the branches of wisdom and knowledge, which may at times ask us to correct the wrongs of previous actions. Bless our minds to follow us so that we can better care for this earth. Lord, let this time be spent in righteousness and in proper perspective. May we be united in overseeing our work. Let our leadership in the world continue to love as we care for the land and everything given to us. May we be united for the giving of peace and the stability of this whole world. Then let us care for the earth with love, and the descendants of all nations will strive for righteousness and peace. Amen.
In the beauty of the rain, in the whispers of the trees, we find a world of life that brings us to our knees. In the rhythm of the sea, in the dances of the wind, we hear the cry for help, a voice from deep within. We are stewards of the earth. We are guardians of its worth. We are champions of its grace. Let's make the earth a better place for you and me. In the colors of the fields, in the tapestry of clouds, we are witnesses of life, a masterpiece of art. To protect we take a stand together hand in hand, for the season's gentle smile, and for the life of every child. We are stewards of the earth. We are guardians of its worth. We are champions of its grace. Let's make the earth a better are stewards of the earth. We are guardians of its worth. We are champions of its grace. Let's make the earth a better place for you and me.
Thank you, Kenneth. Terrific. All right. We greatly appreciate your prayer and musical intro. We will now turn things over to the Reverend Rob Grable.
Thank you. I'm delighted that we could have Judith with us today. She is the founder and the president of Beyond Plastics, which is a 5-year-old vigorous policy and education collaborative based in Bennington, Vermont, but with a nationwide reach. They're hoping to educate media, policymakers, and the public on the plastic pollution crisis. And she is eminently qualified to educate us. She is a former regional administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency under the Obama administration. She's been involved in a lot of government policy positions. It stands out that she is a past president of the Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. And I will let Judith talk a bit more. If you do nothing else today, dear friends, make sure you go online and look at Beyond Plastics. I'm sure that before I'm done talking, Brooks will have it in the chat. And we really encourage you. This is a great meeting of a wonderful policy organization that needs people on the ground. And here we are, ready to do earth justice and social justice, as we did with our wonderful presentation on Earth Day Saturday last week. Judith, please welcome and take it away.
Thank you, Reverend. Best introduction ever. I especially like your emphasis on the word vigorous. We are vigorously trying to rid the world of plastic pollution. It's such an honor to be with all of you. And speaking of our website, beyondplastics.org, go to it for 2 reasons, but don't go till after my talk. And here are the 2 things I want you to do. One is sign up for our free emails so you can plug in. Tomorrow night, we're actually doing a webinar with Dr. Phil Landrigan on plastics and health, which I'm not going to do a deep dive on today. And if you're from New York, we need your help in the next month to pass a really important plastic packaging reduction bill pending in the legislature. On our website, there's information on how to sign up for an important lobby day and rally in Albany on May 14th. And if you're not in New York, you know someone in New York and you can send them that information. So let me get my PowerPoint going. Okay, can everyone see that all right? Yes, okay. So unfortunately, at the federal level, the Congress doesn't seem to be functioning particularly well. So what Beyond Plastics does at the federal level is mostly play whack-a-mole, trying to beat back bad ideas. And our innovative leadership is really at the state level, which is better for all of you, I think, because I think it's easier to access state lawmakers than federal. And I was asked today to mostly talk about extended producer responsibility, or EPR. So that's what I'm mostly going to address, if I can get the slides to advance. So as mentioned, I used to work for President Obama. This is me standing at a toxic waste site in New Jersey, living the dream. And I don't know about you, but I really miss no drama Obama. And we worked hard at the EPA to protect the environment. And my final time at EPA, I had a lot of time to think about what to do next, because when you're appointed to your job by the president, you leave when he, or hopefully in the future she, leaves. So you literally have years to think about your next step. And it's not like I had a lot of offers from the fossil fuel industry. So I decided to teach at Bennington College, which is near my home. I live in upstate New York. But also I wanted to work full time on the plastics issue, because it's an environmental justice issue, it's an ocean issue, it's a toxics issue, it's a recycling failure, it's every issue, it's a climate issue, it's every issue I worked on in my career, and I felt like it needed much more public attention. For some of you will also appreciate the fact that my parents named me after Saint Jude. In the Catholic tradition, the patron saint of lost causes. They seem to have known my career trajectory right when I was born. So we are taking on the plastics industry, the fossil fuel industry, and the chemical industry all at once. But it's not really a lost cause. Here is the fundamental problem. We are consuming too much stuff in the United States. We're 4% of the world's population. We use 24% of the world's natural resources. Absolutely not sustainable. And when it comes to plastics, plastics is plan B for the fossil fuel industry. What I mean by that is the fossil fuel industry is losing money on their two big areas that they concentrate on. One is they sell fossil fuels to power plants for electricity generation. And we know we're finally shifting to energy efficiency and clean renewable energy sources like solar, wind, heat pumps, hydropower, etc. So they see a depressed market share in the power sector. Their other big sector is transportation fuels, and many people are shifting to electric vehicles, improvements in mass transit. So the fossil fuel industry decided to make plastics their plan B. And in a business as usual scenario, we are flooding the world with plastic. I read a study at EPA, which has really got me focused on this issue a couple years ago. Projections are that unless we pass new laws to change the status quo, by 2025, next year, for every 3 pounds of fish in the ocean, there'll be 1 pound of plastic. 3 pounds of fish, 1 pound of plastic. Most of that plastic is washed off of the land. It's not just ships out in the deep sea illegally dumping. It's mostly street litter. And we know so many people in the world depend upon fish from the ocean as their major source of protein. And we're turning our ocean into a landfill. There is also a risk to human health. This slide is a little dated. It's actually 16,000 chemicals are used to produce plastics. When scientists look for plastic in the human body, they find it. They have found microplastics, which is 5 millimeters or less. That's a microplastic on the person's finger. Just look at that like blue microplastic. Microplastics have been found in the human lung tissue, blood, breast milk, the human placenta on both the fetal side and the maternal side, which is very significant because the fetus is just hanging out for 8 or 9 months and still microplastics build up. And most recently, there was a very important report in the New England Journal of Medicine documenting the presence of microplastics in the human heart and linking that exposure to higher rates of heart attack, stroke, and premature death. And that'll be covered in our webinar tomorrow. The other issue I want to flag for you on the climate change front is we did a report not long ago where we documented greenhouse gas emissions associated with production, use, and disposal of plastics. And it's so significant that it'll exceed the greenhouse gas emissions from coal plants by 2030. So we're all working so hard to shut down coal plants, only to have those greenhouse gas emissions replaced with emissions from plastic production. Plastics is very much an environmental justice issue. Plastics are mostly produced at petrochemical facilities in Texas, Louisiana, and Appalachia, where these facilities are literally poisoning people. Most notably, take a look at an area 85 miles along the Mississippi River in Louisiana is actually called Cancer Alley. And it hurts my heart every time I say Cancer Alley, but that's what it's called. And it's because there's a high rate of cancer, which has been linked to exposure from the pollution. So that's the broad overview, but I've been asked to talk about extended producer responsibility, or EPR. So quick story. I was not really planning on working on EPR at the state level. Great. So I was not really planning on working on EPR at the state level. However, the plastics industry, those rascals, they decided to introduce very weak legislation that pretends to fix the growing problem of plastic pollution, but doesn't really. And so this is a common tactic by lobbyists. You see a good bill coming, so you put a bad bill out first to try to block the good bill. So we have been opposing weak EPR bills around the country and advocating for effective packaging reduction bills. And I don't call it EPR, extended producer responsibility. The bill we have introduced in New York, which is the strongest in the country, is called the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. Those are our sponsors, Deborah Glick in the Assembly, Pete Harcum in the Senate. And we have until June 6th to pass it in New York. Next slide. Broad public support for not just regulating single-use plastic, but banning it. Next slide. So this is a mind-numbing graph, but essentially what extended producer responsibility is, EPR, is it puts responsibility for handling the packaging on the companies that sell the packaging, rather than you and I as taxpayers. So far, companies have gotten a free ride. They produce massive amounts of packaging, a lot of plastic packaging, and they have no financial responsibility to make sure it's reused, recycled, or disposed of at incinerators or landfills. We pay. This is a polluter pay bill. The companies that produce the packaging should pay for proper management. Next slide. So EPR has been around in Europe and Canada for decades. It saves taxpayer dollars, so fiscal conservatives should like this bill. Next slide. 4 states have already adopted packaging reduction laws in the last 2 years. Most of the state laws listed here are weak. I don't think they're going to fix the problem. And a lot of that is not due to people working hard, but last minute industry influence. Next slide. So we have to watch out for weak bills. They're popping up everywhere. They're like tulips in April. Next slide. So here are the key elements of a strong packaging reduction bill. All of this is in the New York bill right now, but if you're thinking of working with partners in other states, here's what you want. And we have a model bill on our website. So focus, traditionally EPR was just put a modest fee on packaging, send that money to local governments to fund recycling programs. That's good, but it's not enough. And it doesn't solve the plastics problem, because plastic recycling has been an abysmal failure and only comes in at 5 to 6% recycling rate. So our model bill requires 50% reduction in packaging over 10 years, and the rest should be recycled. So it's going to prompt a redesign of packaging, no burning or use of what's called chemical recycling, very similar to the bottle bill. Thank you. We need strong oversight and accountability in the law, eco-modulated fees paid by packaging companies, and no loopholes. Next slide. So number one, we want less packaging. You've all had the experience of receiving something at home and comes in layer after layer and layer of packaging. A new law like this would prevent that, and it does cover internet sales. Next slide. So I mentioned less than 6% of your plastic waste is actually recycled. It's because plastics have thousands of different chemicals, different colors, different polymers. It's not like you can take an aluminum can and recycle it into a new aluminum can. So think of your own home or apartment. You might have a bright orange detergent bottle for cleaning your laundry, and then your refrigerator might have a clear, squeezable plastic bottle with ketchup in it. Those two bottles cannot be recycled together because they're too different. And the plastics industry has been lying to us for decades, saying, don't worry about all your plastic use, just toss it in your recycling bin, we'll take care of it. Turns out that was not true. The people who know that plastics are fundamentally not recyclable are the people who make it. It was very misleading to the public. Next slide. So our goal is to mostly reduce packaging, not just recycle it. Next slide. We're looking for packaging to be redesigned. So if you're a packaging engineer at a big company, you have to think about what happens to the packaging when consumers are done with it. And we want to get toxics out of packaging. Next slide. Here's how I want you to think about this. At the federal level, we have fuel efficiency standards for cars. So a car you buy today is dramatically more efficient than a car you bought 10 years ago. So you're paying less at the pump. We have appliance efficiency standards for refrigerators and washing machines. If you buy a new appliance today, it's much more efficient than what you bought a couple years ago, and you save on your utility bills. Why not environmental standards for packaging? Next slide. Really important. People don't understand the massive amount of toxic chemicals in packaging. So our model bill eliminates 19 of the most toxic chemicals in packaging, including PFAS, vinyl chloride, formaldehyde, heavy metals like lead and mercury. Next slide. After lying to us for decades about the recyclability of plastics, the plastic industry is finally admitting, oh, we were wrong. You really can't recycle that much plastic. So now they're pushing something called chemical recycling, which is even worse. It's basically heating the plastic to a really high temperature and turning it into oil. Fossil fuels, the last thing we need. And then just a few facilities will turn it into new plastic, but it uses a massive amount of toxic chemicals to do that. And there are only 10 of these facilities in the whole country, and they're only handling 1.3% of the nation's plastic waste. So it's more of a marketing, lobbying message than a real solution. Next slide. We have to have strong oversight and accountability. The plastics companies are not going to solve the problem on their own. Next slide. And the way I want you to think about this is when you work on these bills at the state level, is the industry says they want to set up something called a producer responsibility organization, or a PRO, because they don't trust the state agencies to run the program well. And the state agencies are saying, we're so stretched, we don't want to take more responsibility on. So, okay, let them do a producer responsibility organization, but don't put them in charge of the important details, like what is the reduction rate? What should the packaging fee be? We wouldn't have the tobacco industry in charge of anti-smoking programs. You don't have the packaging industry in charge of packaging reduction. And that's an actual movie, Thank You for Smoking, which is old and very funny, and I recommend. Next slide. Lots of taxpayer savings, less stuff to pick up. I love recycling. Keep recycling your metal, paper, cardboard, compost your yard waste and food waste. But recycling is expensive. So collecting it all, processing it, finding a market. We want the companies that produce the packaging to pay rather than you and I. And they pay with what's called an eco-modulated fee. If your packaging is refillable or reusable, you pay no fee. If your packaging is really bad, like what you see in the baby food aisle these days, those pouches for baby food that's not recyclable, you pay a higher fee. So this is new revenue for local governments. Next slide. Avoid big loopholes. I've drafted many bills that have become law, and funny things happen in the middle of the night in state legislatures. Sentences appear in bill. This is actually in the California packaging law. It exempts single-use material that presents unique challenges in compliance. Are you kidding me? Every company is going to say they have unique challenges and they should be exempt from the law. Next slide. And we just don't have control of all the plastic packaging and other packaging coming at us. So that's why we need laws like this one. Next slide. So it's a new revenue source. The way this works is the state develops what's called a needs assessment, a shopping list, where local governments say, I need this amount of money to improve my recycling program, or I need this amount of money to do a waste reduction program. What's that? It could be installing drinking water fountains in public places so people don't have to buy single-use plastic water bottles. It could be buying dishwashing equipment for all our schools so children eat on real durable dishes, not single-use plastic disposables. Lots of good options on refill and reuse. And the money will also fund state agencies so they can do the appropriate level of oversight. Next slide. We need to pass new laws because even though some companies are feeling a little bit of heat that they're generating too much plastic, they make these grand public pledges and then they don't honor them. So these are corporate promises to use recycled material, not even waste reduction. So the red bar is what these companies said they would do, and the blue bar is what they're actually doing. So for instance, Coca-Cola said they'll use 25% recycled content in their bottles. They're using 10%. L'Oreal said they'd use 50%. They're using 7%. I love Kellogg. They said they would use 10%. They're under 1%. I think this slide illustrates that flowery public announcements that are voluntary just don't work. Next slide. So we need strong laws, and we only get that with grassroots support, your support. We're going up against really big companies who are opposed to these changes, and the only thing we have on our side are two things: compelling facts and people power. Next slide. So I want to quickly show you, what does this mean when she rambles on about waste reduction, reuse? You got to see some examples. So here's a company that sells soap with no packaging. So they're fully complying with the law. Next slide. This soap container is made for, the container itself is made from compressed soap. So after you finish the contents, you can use the container as soap. No waste at all. It's kind of from a Portlandia TV show episode, but I like it because that's my favorite TV show of all time. Next slide. Oh, is it stuck again? Okay. We all need deodorant. So every time you buy new deodorant, you basically toss out that plastic cylinder. Dove is now selling just the deodorant itself, and you install it into that plastic cylinder, and you can use it for a lifetime. Next slide. We're really bullish on commercial bottle washing operations. So you can refill and reuse bottles. There's great potential in the wine industry, in the dairy industry. That's okay, go on. This is another company we like to spotlight called Plain Products. You order their shampoo and their body lotion in stainless steel. When it's empty, you send it back to them and you get a new one that's filled up. They had no supply chain problems during COVID. Next slide. Reuse and refill stations. Some of us probably go to food co-ops with empty jars. You have to get your jar weighed. You go fill it up. I always spill the peanut butter on the floor. I have to find a mop. It's a whole routine. Unilever is piloting these handy little refill stations in stores. And you just return the empty containers like you would an empty soda bottle in a Bottleville state. And it's much, much easier to do refill. Next slide. This is another company called Blue Land. And you can buy, for instance, laundry detergent tablets. And when you run out, you just get the new tablets. You don't have to buy the new packaging. One of my concerns is we want this to be very mainstream. We don't want these products to be super expensive or things you can only buy online. And so Blue Land is now selling their products in, I think, Walgreens and Target. You've got to make it easy for people. Next slide. Smarties in Europe is M&Ms. So if you buy M&Ms in the US, it comes in that waxy pouch. All you can do is throw it out in the garbage. Same product in Europe. When your package is empty, you put it in the recycling bin and it is recycled just like newsprint. Next slide. Mentos used to be 100% plastic. It's now 90% paperboard. I still don't like it. It's too spicy. Next slide. And we're almost over. If you don't want totally naked soap, just wrap it in a piece of cardboard that can be recycled. Next slide. So does anyone ever finish the lip balm? I have one in my purse since the Carter administration. The plastic lip balm lasts forever. You can do it in cardboard lip balm. Next. Berries are a real problem. We always want fresh berries in the winter. Comes in plastic. Driscoll's is now in some markets selling berries in cardboard containers that you can just put in your recycling bin. Next slide. So the details really matter. All those pictures we just showed you, that kind of innovation will only happen on a grander scale, on a wider scale, if we pass laws to require it. Some key provisions are don't allow the toxics provision to be taken out of the bill. That happens in every state. They always say, oh, we'll do the toxics piece in a separate bill, and they never do. And whenever you are working on state legislation, you have to look out for the loopholes. Next slide. So follow Beyond Plastics on social media. Yes, we're still on Twitter. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I'm a Twitter addict. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. That is our website. Lots of good information there. We do a lot of free programming. Please publicize it within your congregations. Next slide. Happy to take questions. So again, I'd love questions about systemic change and policy change, as opposed to, I have this obscure item, where can I recycle it? The answer is probably nowhere. So happy to take any comments or questions.
How can a state like New Hampshire, which already tried once to get an EPR bill and it didn't pass, how can we increase our chances of passing it next time around?
The only way you can do that is with more grassroots organizing. We are totally outmaneuvered when you enter the state house. There are like too many lobbyists for chemical industries. We're going toe-to-toe with Kraft Food in New York. They're putting out these crazy comments about what this bill would do. But you counter it with grassroots organizing, meeting with your legislators in their districts, doing letters to the editor, doing social media, building coalitions, even in difficult states. Lawmakers have to answer to voters. And in many states, this is an election year. I'm hesitant to tell you this, but the first bill I ever worked on was in New York. I was a college student and I worked on the New York bottle bill, which we got signed into law in 1982. Don't do the math. I worked on it as an infant, and it took 10 years to pass the bottle bill back then. So I don't want to advertise that it can sometimes take 10 years, but you never get it in year 1, 2, or 3. So just keep organizing, work with other groups. And Beyond Plastics, we have trainings for grassroots activists, which I encourage you to sign up for. They're coming up, I think, soon, maybe in the next week or two. My colleague, Dr. Megan Wolf, heads up trainings. And so just go to beyondplastics.org, sign up for our grassroots training. We also have local groups and affiliates. We get bombarded with questions and people want to get involved. They want to know what to do. We can't keep up with all of that. And so we set up this rather ambitious structure that I want to invite you all to participate in. If you're with an existing group or congregation, you can become a Beyond Plastics affiliate. If you're not with an existing group, you can become a local Beyond Plastics group. So we have Beyond Plastics Queens, Beyond Plastics Greater Boston, and then we have Third Act and League of Women Voters and Water Keepers as affiliates. And we provide monthly support, information. We connect you with people in your own community. And it's a little kooky that we're doing this because it's such a big country. But we just started this about 2.5 years ago with no funding. And we've grown to 135 local groups and affiliates. People are very upset with so much plastic. They want to get involved and they don't know how to start. So that's our whole jam at Beyond Plastics, is giving people places to start. And we encourage people to start at the local level, and we encourage a policy focus. And if you're good at the local level, you climb up to the state level with us. And then eventually we'll do something federally, but we're not there quite yet. That was a long answer, Marge. I hope it helped.
It did. Thank you.
This is Reverend Heather Moody. I serve First Congregational United Church of Christ in Poughkeepsie, New York, and love hearing you on WAMC's Roundtable. Thank you so much for all of your contributions there. Quick question for you. It seems to me that a big piece obviously is working on legislation, but to get people to be interested in working on legislation, having knowledge of what the problems are, what the toxicity, how it's produced. I've gone on your website and learned a little bit of those sorts of things, but I'm particularly mindful that it's not only plastic packaging, it's everything from vinyl siding, it's PVC pipe. I mean, it's like, holy Moses, this is everywhere.
Yeah.
So would you have any recommendations, or is that part of your grassroots training, as far as how to communicate to people what all these different health risks are, not only in it being the finalized product being used, but also in the producing of the product?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Reverend, so much for raising that. And, the issue I care the most about is the production end. poisoning people in environmental justice communities. It's all environmental justice communities on both production and disposal. Because plastic recycling is so low, most of it ends up being burned, like in the Dutchess County incinerator, the Peekskill incinerator, or a landfill. It's buried, also environmental justice communities. My quick response is, whenever you have a free hour, you should go to pbs.org and watch the new documentary, We Are All Plastic People Now. I'm trying to get that shown in the New York State Legislature in May. We are all plastic people now. And there's a whole bunch of good films. We just, through our local groups and affiliates, we just coordinated the showing of a really old but still accurate documentary called
Blue Vinyl.
Blue Vinyl. Thank you. And I saw Blue Vinyl actually in Poughkeepsie 30 years ago. We showed it at the Bardavon, and I watched it again, and it's still totally accurate. If anything, it's gotten worse. So there are a lot of good movies that congregations and organizations can sponsor and then have a panel afterwards. We're going to be making a big concerted effort to show We Are All Plastic People Now over the next 6 months. And that phrase that is so wise and sometimes gets on my nerves, meet people where they are. That's what we're trying to do. And I can't say we're highly effective at it because everyone is at a different place. And we're policy wonks. We are like too in the weeds on these issues. And we are not, I think, effective enough on broad public education, which is why we're doing the local groups and affiliates. But Heather, come to Albany on May 14th and join us at the lobby day. We need people from Poughkeepsie.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Also a noontime rally.
Nice.
Oh, Beth, a Bennington alum. Yay. The way I landed at Bennington was I worked with the professors there on PFOA in Hoosick Falls when I was at EPA, and I was so impressed with how the Bennington students and professors served that community. And then they invited me to teach there, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. I wasn't planning on teaching. What do you have in mind? And then, of course, I negotiated and said, well, what if I teach a class on plastics pollution? And if I decide to start a group to work on plastics, can Bennington College be our home and our fiscal sponsor? And they said, sure, which was so nice of them. And so we've grown from 1 staff person to 13 in the last 5 years. And we're trying to add staff because there's so much work to do, and we want to support volunteers. 99% of the work on the plastics issue being done in this country is being done by volunteers, and we want to support volunteers. I think I've run out the clock. Thank you, everyone. So nice to see you, and please be in touch, and thanks for tackling this. We need everyone. What's that phrase? I was at a climate rally. To change everything, we need everyone, and that includes you.
And we are now going to turn it to Dwight for an update on the Electrification Initiative.
There we go. Unmuted. You may be able to hear me. Well, I was prepared to give a little bit of a downer report. We haven't made as much progress, but Judith's presentation, I found energizing. I mean, what she's saying is we have to be persistent. So the fact that we don't have the whole denomination organized and with a plan, at least in progress on electrification, it means that we're in year 1 of a plan that's going to take more than a couple of months or even 1 year. So we've reached out to every conference. We have, I would say, a mixed response. A couple of conference ministers have gotten right back to us. We haven't heard anything from some, so we're in the follow-up process of reaching out and trying to identify The conferences, no, it's not the conferences, it's the individuals and the congregations that are doing something so we can start that conversation, because we're not with all the answers on electrification reaching out to you. We're reaching out to gather the experience, because all together, as Judith said, we win this all together. We have this combination amongst us of the answers to electrification, of how we educate people on climate, on electrification as a doable response. So we're reaching out, and I'm invigorated by Judith's presentation today. And I'm also going to ask your help, folks. If you've had even 2 meetings about your congregation or your individual response to the climate injustice, reach out and tell us about that, or give us the name of that person in your congregation or in your conference that is really excited at the prospect, or who is willing to work with us. We, send it to me,
All right.
dwagenius@gmail.com.
All right. Thank you, Dwight. And we'll make sure everybody also has the checklist, the checklist for
Absolutely.
church electrification and the checklist for one's own electrifying one's home. So we'll get those and out to everybody in the follow-up email. All right. We'll now turn to Sue for the Vote for Climate Hope campaign.
Thanks, Brooks. I am the Climate Hope campaign organizer for the national offices here in Cleveland for the UCC Church. So I am absolutely thrilled to join you today and just quickly discuss the Vote for Climate Hope campaign. And the Vote for Climate Hope campaign, it's a member-driven initiative which is rooted in the UCC's commitment to faith-based climate action and inequality at the federal level. In 2024, our top priorities include electing climate justice champions to Congress and advocating for legislation that addresses environmental racism and the harms that are faced by frontline communities. Our campaign consists of several key components, and the big one is right now our Vote for Climate Hope art contest, where children and youth express their hopes for the environment through art. This contest engages younger generations in climate activism and encourages reflection on their aspirations for the world. The Vote for Climate Hope art contest award ceremony is this Saturday, May 4th at 4 o'clock. We have 106 churches participating in over 30 states with 444 little artists. The categories for award winners are 6 and under, 7 to 10, 10 to 13, and 14 to 18, with 1 overall winner. Each winner will receive a goodie bag with UCC swag, along with last year's Climate Change Hope mug and a book for each group on climate change. The overall winner will have their artwork displayed on our Climate Hope campaign postcards and used in our campaign branding for 2024. If you'd like to watch the awards ceremony, I think Brooks is going to pop the link into the comments. If not, I can as soon as I'm done here. But the Vote for Climate Hope campaign, it's a testament to our commitment to addressing the urgent climate crisis we face. So I encourage all of you to get involved and join us in our efforts to create a more just and sustainable future for the generations to come. Thanks. Back to you, Brooks.
Thank you so much, Sue. And I'm reminded of what Bill McKibben has said, vote as if the future of humanity depends on it, because it does. And so this is a really urgent and needed campaign right now, as we'll have people throughout the country collecting voter pledge cards, because we know when people make a pledge to vote, they're much more likely to actually then vote. And so an important campaign that we have. We have come to the end of our time. We're grateful to each of you. We'll send out a post assembly email with some of the links that have been shared and discussed. We'll also have a link to the recording and as well also a link to the slide presentation from Judith. And so we look forward to seeing all of you in another 2 months, most likely to kind of not be too close to July 4th. We'll not do it on the first Wednesday of July, but we'll include notice of the exact date that will suit us best. So take care, everyone, and good to see you all here.